So they asked if I would mind doing the introduction of a man who needs no introduction, having already been present yesterday and during the L2 series. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nick Sunderland, CEO of Customised Construction Management Services, a company in Malaysia, who in a multitude of ways embraces the ethos of our speaker today in keeping things simple, plain language and sticking to basic principles, which for years have successfully worked, long before technology came to the forefront and in some ways complicated things. Without further ado, I hand you over to today's speaker, Dr. Naseem. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, what I'll do is, Nick, what I'll do is I'll share the screen before you go off. Let me just share screen to make sure that it works. And that, is that okay? Once you confirm, then I'll take over from there.
Yes, we look good.
Okay, right, good morning.
Okay, thank you.
Those in the UK, good morning, and those in the Middle East, I've got a list of where you are from. There's about, I think today, 17 different countries that you've all logged in from. So welcome all, morning, good afternoon, good evening. Maybe some from America who probably should be sleeping. And if they are, I did suggest to them that perhaps they might want to listen to the YouTube recording once all this is over, rather than staying up too late, because we must have rest. Now, this is the second day of the 5-day series. Yesterday, I know not everyone was here yesterday, but those who were here yesterday would have got a little bit of my background. My background, I'm a quantity surveyor by background, and I moved into project management, 20 years in industry, construction industry in the UK and in Malaysia. And for the past years, I've been in New Zealand, and I've been an academic for the past 10 years at Massey University in Auckland in New Zealand. But my heart is still, to a certain extent, in industry, in that I still do keep in touch, and I'm heavily involved in drafting construction contracts, not just within Malaysia, New Zealand, but also elsewhere. Now, I'll just share with you what we're going to do. But before that, as always, because New Zealand is very conscious of disasters and so on, I have to repeat this at every session. Although I've done this yesterday, but there are a whole bunch of new people who might have come in. So, health, safety, house rules, emergencies. In an emergency, look out for the nearest exit. In my case, it's there. That's the door. Turn around, downstairs, out to the front, end of the shared driveway, onto the road. That is where I will assemble with the rest of the family. I will, of course, on the way, make sure that the children and my wife are also with me. That's the first thing. Now that we've got COVID-19, we know the drills. Your face is sacred. Don't touch it. Well, unless your hands are clean. Particularly your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. Don't touch it. Don't bite your fingernails. It's a good time to take that habit off. Second, clean hands all the time, throughout the day, as many times as possible, because you might have touched certain surfaces, and then you touch your face and so on. You can get contaminated that way. And third, I repeat, physical distancing, not social distancing. Doesn't matter if the rest of the world calls it social distancing. We, for the purpose of this webinar, we'll call it physical distances. We're talking about plain language and actually reflecting exactly what it is that we're meaning. So in other words, physical distancing, 2 meters apart wherever possible, and not social distancing. Now, this is actually Nick, and he's the one who sent it to me. I haven't asked his permission to use it, but since he sent it on WhatsApp, I'm assuming I've got every right to use it. This is Nick whenever he is at a webinar. So it'll take about 1 minute, 45 seconds, and you can listen to it. I hope you can hear me. If you can't, wave or something.
Hi guys, I trust you're well and managing to avoid the coronavirus. I'm happily retired now, but I imagine most of you guys will be working from home and must resort to Zoom or FaceTime or Skype for your video conferencing. Well, that's all well and good. But even though you're working from home, it is essential to retain some standards of sartorial elegance. And with that in mind, I've invented the Zoom suit. With a little practice, in less than 10 seconds, you'll be able to jump off the sofa, put down your beer, turn off the TV, and jump into the Zoom suit for those all-important meetings. There we go. Oops, almost forgot the hat. This is a prototype version with a single Velcro fastener at the back and a separate cuff in case you need to use your hands at any time during the meeting. Of course, you can continue to drink beer as long as you first pour it into a bone china cup and don't forget to raise the pinky. I've also invented a backdrop for those wanting to appear a little more pretentious in their home offices. Anyway, that's about it. I've attached some instructions at the end of this video if you want to make your own Zoom suit. Now I suppose it's back to the sofa. So, cheers and stay safe.
Right. I hope you, with that introduction and knowing Nick a little bit better, we can carry on. On day one, which was yesterday, we talked about contract formation. We talked about plain legal drafting principles. And I suggested that we'll be looking at contract administration procedures using pro forma templates. I gave one or two quick examples, and today we'll be looking at one or two of those. And over the next couple of days, we will be looking at the rest. And I did mention that I'll briefly mention about the making of this contract called the Standard Terms of Construction Contracts, Renovation and Small Projects 2015. Now, I didn't quite cover much of the making of it, but I'll briefly mention that today. Now, before that, I did say, and I'll repeat this, that questions, I'm happy for you to start typing the questions anytime throughout this hour or so, for you to ask the questions on the chat, either private one or the general one. It's okay if you don't want it to be publicly disclosed, and you send to a private one. And the following day, I'll respond to the questions of the previous day. For instance, I had a number of questions from yesterday. I'll answer every one of those questions right now. And then today's questions, I will answer first thing tomorrow when we commence. Now, one of the things that I noticed yesterday was that the poll results at the end that we took, there were about 462 people who were in attendance yesterday, and about 311 people responded to the first question: do you prefer construction contracts to be in plain language or traditional language? The answer was 97 people said they prefer plain language, and 3%, 10 of them, said they prefer traditional language. And then the next question was, if it could be rewritten in plain language, when should it be done by? 25% said 2020, 47% said by 2025, and by 2030, 29% of the people. Now, I could be wondering, why did 10 people say they prefer the traditional style of writing? Good question. I can hypothesize why they might have said that. I hope that today, second day, we can run through some more examples, and it might be because they think, oh, is it tried and tested? Or is it because, oh, but can you legally write a document without losing legal intent and so on? So we'll carry on today and see perhaps if those 10 people could be persuaded that it would be better to have a contract in plain language rather than traditional language, which is consistent with research done in America in two or three different states, where more than 80% of lawyers prefer plain language, and more than 80% of judges. Two different surveys done by Professor Joseph Kimball in America, and consistently more than 80% prefer plain language, both lawyers and judges. But we've got 97%, which is good enough. Let's move on. Now, yesterday, as some of you were asking, the tech moderator had already typed in the web chat features some links. So maybe if Daniel, his nickname is actually Clark, but anyway, we won't go into that for now, or Superman. And if he can, maybe he can retype these links so that you can save it onto your desktop and then watch it later. Don't watch it now. Listen to me, because I've got lots to cover today. And those are some of the links. The whole 30 days of sessions that L2 had organized, Leong Hong Kit and Lam Wai Lun, is now in YouTube, thanks to the tech moderator who must have done a lot of work making sure it's all up and running. I want to say that on day 13, I had spoken. So that's also a session. That was only for 30 minutes. And this is an expansion of it. And day 20 is where you will see Nick. There's another session that he did as well. That was a bit more of a fun session where we were all interviewed, the 4 of us were interviewed about whether academic and professional qualifications are important or not. And Nick clearly came out the winner because apparently he earns the most. And then the 4th link there is the SDCC, the contract itself, which is handy, so you can download it anytime you want. Okay, what were the questions? Now, let me just reduce some of you here. Okay, so that you're not in the way. And let me pin my... Okay, right. First, contract terminology varies in different countries, one of you asked. Do look into the US contracts as comparison. First response, I am more comfortable and I'm more familiar with contracts in Commonwealth jurisdictions, admittedly, but ooh, here is a challenge. Look at the US contracts. Ooh, I was delighted. But between yesterday and today, I didn't have a chance to actually buy one of those American Institute of Architects contract, but I managed to get a sample pages from it. So here are some sample pages, which I managed to extract. Now, this one is from the AIA document A101 2017. I'm assuming this is the most commonly used American contract. Again, I have no knowledge of American contracts, but I just took a cursory glance at it and I looked at some sample pages. There's no issue of copyright here. Now, it says here, agreement made on the day and so on between the owner and contractor. Not too bad, between the owner. Remember, in the UK, they call it employer. In Commonwealth jurisdictions, generally, that follow the UK, they tend to call it employer, employer, employer. In New Zealand, we call it principal, and so on. So different people use different things. It doesn't matter. No problem with that. Let's look at the other. This agreement entered into as of the day and year first written above. Starting to be a little bit fancy, but it's okay. It's not too bad. It just says owner, signature, printed name and title. Not too bad, but I don't like the part entered into on the day and year first written above. Starting to be sounding pompous, which is not necessary. And then the other document on insurances, to the fullest extent permitted by the law, the contractor shall cause the commercial general liability coverage to include. Okay. Yeah, it could be better. The question is this. That's my opinion. I wonder what Professor Joseph Kimball, who rewrote the court procedures in the US, I kid you not, he rewrote the court procedures in the US in plain language, Professor Joseph Kimball. I would rank him as the top 10, probably top 5 in the world in monolegal drafting. I wonder what he has to say about this. Probably, I'm willing to bet that he probably thinks it can be better. It's not too bad, but it can be better. And then I also noticed, remember, the contract is not just about the words, it's also about the whole scheme of things. And I saw, oh, they have the A, B, and C series, a bit like the BMW 5 Series, 7 Series, 3 Series, and so on. So they got the A, B, and C. And then I was trying to understand, what is the A series? What's the B series? And I noticed, okay, so A series is the contract between the owner, the client, and the contractor, okay? And there are a few of them. And then between the owner and the consultants is called the B series. And I was thinking, what is the C series? It's like, I get the impression the C series is a subcontract between the architect and the consultants. Looks like in America, the architect is almighty, and then they then enter into contracts with consultants. And then the other is owners that might have direct consultants. Okay, starting to get a feel for it. So
it's 7:15.
Not too bad, but we're getting there. Okay, the rest of the questions now. Very quickly. Is active sentence always better than passive sentence? The answer is absolutely not. Maybe I was rushing a bit yesterday. I had only 1 hour and I took 62 minutes yesterday. Minus the 2 hours of interruption, I took exactly 60 minutes yesterday. So what I said was, it is preferable to draft contracts in the active sentence rather than the passive. And Judge Mark Painter, in his 40 Rules of Legal Drafting, suggests the 18-18 rule. 18 words per sentence average is good, and about 18% passive sentences is fine, he says. So I would suggest that about 18% or 20% of sentences in a typical contract can be passive, and the remaining 80 should be active. And I'll repeat an example I gave yesterday very quickly. An example of an active sentence is, the contractor must submit the program. Okay, and then passive one will be, the program must be submitted by the contractor. Do you see that? Okay, the cat bit the dog is active. The dog was bitten by the cat is passive. So one uses more words. Passive sentences tend to use more words and it's a bit more indirect. It's a little bit harder for you to pick up the sentence structure. So active is better, 80%, passive 20% or so is okay. Fitness purpose, what is this? Now, I'll be covering this today anyway, so I'm not going to cover it right now, but yes, an extremely important point here. What is fitness purpose? What is, well, the question was duty of care. Actually, duty and care. I've just reproduced what the question was. It's actually reasonable skill and care. So I'll be covering this a little later, so I won't answer it right now. What do you propose personally should replace shall? May? No, the answer is no. If shall is to mean must, use the word must. If you mean shall to mean may, like for instance, the client shall be entitled to deduct liquidated damages, then use may. So depending on what you mean, instead of shall, use must if you mean mandatory, and may if you mean optional. That's the answer. Someone is saying, I will learn more on how to start to draft plain language from you, although I have no idea on how for now. It's a bit like learning a new language, Chinese or Spanish or Italian or whatever. Hard work, but I tell you what, it is not difficult. It is not difficult. And that's why I will give a couple of references of books in one of my slides today, which I did give yesterday as well. I'll give that as well, so that you can start looking at these books. It's not hard, but it requires practice. Thank you. However, living with 40 years of old complex legal jargon takes a lot of effort to retrain the brain to draft in plain English language. Heard you speak on this topic sometime. Oh, okay, right, fine. The answer is, indeed, if you've been living with 40 years of old complex legal jargon, I tell you what, it is never too late. My target is within 10 years, by 2030, the whole world, all construction contracts in the world, I repeat, all construction contracts in the world, including the traditional JCT, PAM, JKR, 3910. 3910 is not too bad anyway, but a little bit of more work to do. And JBCC and the Indian contracts and Hong Kong contracts and so on. They can all be written. I'm giving it 10 years for us to pick up a new language called plain language. At 15, 17, 18 seconds, someone wrote this. Lol, you nailed it again, Dr. Naseem. Look, I don't know what the question is. So I don't even know what you mean. So fine, I mean, I must have said something and you've responded that. Thank you. And I assume lol means laughing out loud. That's okay. Look, I want this session to be a little bit more fun. The 30 days that Hongkit and Wailun had, it was a fun session. It wasn't all serious, boring stuff on contracts and COVID and everything else. So that's okay. You can write whatever you want, except that I don't know what it is that I nailed. Anyway, if you can give some feedback, that'll be brilliant. And one of you has asked, thank you for hosting a great forum to share a questionnaire. Someone's doing a PhD from IIT, IIT in India. Anyway, that's the equivalent of the Harvard or the MIT in India. And he asked whether he could share this. I've asked Hongkit for permission. He said, yeah, why not? So, so whoever it is that asked to do this survey, share this link on the chat function. People can copy it and they can save it. And once we're finished today, then they can do your survey. Warning, I suggested to you, you should give them indication how long it'll take to do this response. It took me about 15 minutes. So allow about 15 to 20 minutes, folks, if you're going to do this questionnaire. Now, Barry Cooper Cook, say hi to Monty Sutrishna. That's my boss. What? Look, if you want to say hi to my boss, go and say it yourself. Google his name under Massey University and you'll find his email and say hi. Don't use me as an intermediary to say hi. But anyway, I will. I haven't told him yet. I've been a bit busy. Thank you. Very good session. Enlightening and so funny. Love your sense of humor. Now, good feedback. I appreciate that. If you had said, don't waste my time with humor, just get on with the serious stuff and a serious matter, construction contracts are serious, I would have done that. So because of this, I'm going to keep some sense of humor today as well. Okay, copy your presentation slides, additional reading for my students. Look, all the slides, as long as they're registered, will be sent at the end of the sessions this week. Everything will be on YouTube and the slides will be emailed to you. So that's fine. Nice and concise delivery. Now, why did I extract this? The reason why I extracted is, there's a lot for me to say, but have I said too little or have I said too much? Well, I don't think I said too much because I've only got 1 hour anyway. So as long as I'm within the hour, I'm okay. But it's good to know that it's concise, but at the same time, not overly detailed. I don't know, striking some session. Now, you might see a number of people doing this, signed out of the end of webinar, signed in on the webinar. These are people who are members of the Royal Institution of Surveyors Malaysia, because the only reason why they're here, some of them at least, is because they want CPD points and it's mandatory. Otherwise, they can't renew their registration and their license to license to practice. So they need to sign in and sign out to show that they attended this session to get their 1 measly hour. Look, the main thing you're here, the main reason why you're here is for knowledge. Forget the CPD points. You can get that elsewhere. And someone said this, that, oh, I intend to study for masters so I can be a lecturer. Look, I'll deal with this on day 5, something a little bit more about that, okay? So about doing a master's and so on. Now, there were 3 responses relating to Whittaker's. This is the internationally famous chocolate in New Zealand. Okay, the whole world doesn't know it, but I think it's sold in some duty-frees in some shops in Malaysia. When I mention about Whittaker's, immediately someone say, oh, Whittaker's the best chocolate in the world. Yes, says, I know who said that. It's actually one of my colleagues at Massey University, Juwita. I know she knows how to spell yes, but she must have been saying it in a Kiwi style, yes, or something like that. Anyway, and someone thought that they're going to rush off and buy Whittaker's chocolate. The picture on the left is Hong Kid's Whittaker's chocolate. Apparently, he's been savoring it for so many months, he hasn't finished eating it. And the one on the right is actually mine. Oh, can't see it, can you? Okay, there you go. Anyway, you can see it. I got 2 in front of me. Okay, there you go. That's Whittaker's chocolate, fresh. Now, one of the most difficult questions that I, in fact, dread most is this, but I'll still answer it anyway. Does my name ring a bell? Someone wrote to me on that in a private chat. Look, don't do that to me. I'm bad at names and faces. And what happened was I somehow or other recalled her name and I had 2 guesses and I guessed the first one and was wrong. It was the second one. I should have just guessed both anyway. Anyway, so today we're talking about time, performance, performing the contract relating to time. Now, I'll be covering these various aspects and I'll be using the plain language contract as a basis to explain the principles for good reasons, as I explained yesterday. And but just to remind you, tomorrow we'll be looking at the financials, payments, bonds, insurance, and so on. On day 4, on Thursday, we'll be looking at construction contracts principles relating to defects, liability, quality, subcontracting, termination, and so on. And on day 5, we'll be looking at issues relating to dispute resolution, contract reforms, smart contracts, and continuing education. Anyway, today we're talking about time and very briefly about the making of this particular contract and a little bit on contract administration. Okay. This is the contract. The link will be in your slides, but you've all been given the links anyway, and you probably, I hope, our tech moderator, Daniel, would have typed the link so that you can download it at your own time. The making of it, very briefly, is that it was made not on the back of an existing contract at all. It was a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen. Okay. Now, then what happened is a technical committee was formed, a policy committee was formed. Now, the policy committee comprised architects, engineers, and quantity surveyors, and lawyers, and lots of these people. Anyway, that's the policy committee members. And I was, of course, one of the members as well. And I drafted the contract. Now, what I did was I sent to the policy committee a range of questions on the left column and my sort of suggested answers as a default, which they're happy to change. Example, I asked them, did you want advance payment in your contract? Yes or no? And I assumed yes. I just assumed yes. And I came up with a first draft of the contract. It wasn't written by a committee. I drafted the first draft and I shared it with the committee, but I wanted directions on policy. Policy, not drafting style. Leave that to me. I will draft it. You just tell me. Another question, for instance, do you want the design liability of the contractor to be reasonable skill and care or fitness for purpose? You tell me and we'll draft it accordingly. Another question could be, for instance, do you want payment, the default payment number of days within which payment must be made to be 20 days or 7 days or 30 days or whatever, or 28 days. And there you go. These are policy decisions. So in the end, the contract is an outcome of the final policy that the policy committee made, although admittedly a big chunk of it was what I had proposed as a default, okay? And so the committee deliberated and came up with it. And just to remind you again from yesterday, that this is accredited as a clear English standard document by the Plain Language Commission UK, and it's the first in the world. I've checked with Martin Katz and he confirmed, yeah, this is the first construction contract in the world to have got that accreditation. And when we talk about plain language, I shared this yesterday. What do we mean by plain language? The answer is what any drafting bodies, plain language drafting bodies around the world would have classified it as plain language. And here I had extracted yesterday, and I repeat today, 17. There could be more, of course there are more, but I've just extracted 17 which are which are applicable to this particular contract, completely relevant. Okay, so these are the 3: average words per sentence of about 20, gender neutral language, prefer the active, prefer plain words, fewer syllables, avoid redundant doublets like null and void and so on. Don't say the contractor must submit notice within 7 days, bracket SEVEN. Don't do that. No whereas, herein before, herein after, said, and so on. Good use of paragraphing. No multiple cross-referencing, only referencing to the appendices. Yeah, a logical structure, adopting the project management structure, which I'll share with you in a minute, and avoid excessive and unnecessary definitions. For your information, this particular contract, the only definitions are client with a capital C, contractor with a capital C, and contract administrator with a capital C and capital A. Nothing else starts with a capital letter. Okay, so no definition in that sense, but there are definitions, but without repeating that annoying capitals all over the place. And I notice the American contract even defines agreement with a capital A. I hope they meant contract, not agreement, because yesterday, for those of you who attended, if you haven't, go and watch yesterday's video when it's out in the YouTube. Agreement is one of the ingredients to a legally binding contract. Don't use the word agreement when you mean contract. And preserve legal terms of art. Of course, practical completion, liquidated damage, reasonable skill and care, fitness purpose and all that. Of course you maintain. Don't overdo it. Don't remove legal terms of art. Proceeding with the work regularly and diligently is fine. Keep it. But as I said yesterday, less than 1% of a typical construction contract anywhere in the world is a legal term of art. And avoid using words with multiple meanings, avoid Latin words and phrases like de minimis or and so on. Don't use things like and stroke or. And remember the golden rule, never change your language unless you wish to change your meaning. Always change your language if you want to change your meaning. Okay, and just to summarize, the STCC RSP uses plain language, it adopts a project management language, doesn't have any of those legalisms, and it doesn't have all those Latin phrases and so on. It's got about 25% passive sentences. sentences. Maybe in the next edition, we can do a bit of work and bring it down to about 20, as suggested by Judge Mark Painter. Oh, by the way, Judge Mark Painter is a former United Nations Court of Appeal judge. He's an American judge and well-respected, and one of the certainly top 5 leading authorities in the world. He trains lawyers and judges how to write in plain language. And this contract has got about 5,000 words. It's complex. The background of it is complex, but the actual wordings are nice and simple. Okay, let's zoom into the contract now. This is part B of the contents page. Observe this. I wanted to observe that clause 1 is on the general obligations of contract administration, instructions, and so on. Clause 2 deals with all the time obligation, program, commencement, extension of time, defect, completion, and non-completion, and so on. Clause 3 deals with the financial side, okay, which is the insurance, payment, retention, and so on. Clause 4 is on the quality, health, safety, and so on. Subcontracting clause 5, termination clause 6, and clause 7 is dispute resolution. So it's only 7 clauses. You can call it the 7 series if you want, the BMW 7 series if you want. Now, the question is this. Can really contracts be drafted within broad headings of a mere 7 words? 7 broad categories of clauses? The answer is yes. It's been done. What will be interesting and a challenge is this. Whatever contract you're using around the world, if you're using the JCT, see if you can capture the clauses which are spread all over. The Public Works Department contract in Malaysia, for instance, has got about 80 over clauses. See if they can be grouped under these categories of time, money, quality, and then subcontracting, termination, dispute resolution. And in the beginning, the general obligations, definitions, and so on. That will be a challenge. I think it is possible. It'll be interesting. So wake up, JCT. Here's a challenge to someone in FIDIC, if you're listening to this. Can you restructure your contract into a bit more of a logical structure? One more point I want to say. JCT prides itself in being used in about at least 70% of construction contracts in the UK. Research survey shows that. Now in Malaysia, the PAM ISM 69 contract said, oh, this is a JCT equivalent. Yes, it was pretty much identical in 1969. And then in 1998, after nearly 30 years, it was redrafted. And guess what? They were so proud. Proud of what? Well, after 30 years, we're maintaining the clause numbering. So extension of time, number 23. Loss and expense, clause 24. They were really proud of maintaining and preserving the clause numbering. And guess what? Later on, 2006, same story. 2018, we have maintained the sort of broad clause numbering. There is nothing to be proud of in maintaining the clause numbering. And there is no excuse to say, oh, because everybody in Malaysia who uses the PAM contract, which is the majority of people in the private sector, know that clause 23 is extension of time. You don't have to do that. Here is a bit of proof. In this contract, clause 2 is anything to do with time. So extension of time is going to be there. 3 is anything to do with money. 4 is anything to do with quality. If I were to ask you, and I've often asked this in live audience, what is clause 2? Extension of time, completion, commencement, program, and so on. What is clause 3? All the money clauses. What's 4? Quality. It took them less than 60 seconds to so-called memorize those contracts. And in public forums, I've asked them, are you familiar with FIDIC? Oh, yes. What is clause 23? Well, nobody's memorized it. You don't have to memorize it. So big deal about clause numbering being preserved. Nothing to be proud of. I challenge the drafters of construction contracts around the world to restructure, for a start, the clauses in the contract so it's got a bit more of a project management or logical structure. I challenge that, and I hope by 2030, all construction contracts will have a particular structure. I am not saying that this is the exclusive structure or the sole structure. I'm saying a little bit more of a project management approach, perhaps. Okay. Now, this is one of the front cover pages of the contract itself. The only reason why I put this slide is to demonstrate to you that the word used is client and contractor. That's all. I mean, you can use owner like they do in America. You can use employer like they use in the UK, in Hong Kong, in Singapore as well. Yes, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and Malaysia and Sri Lanka. And in New Zealand, we call it a principal, for instance. It doesn't matter what you call it. I like client. I tell you why. Well, what do you mean by owner? Well, it's a client. What do you mean by employer? Oh, as opposed to employee? No. Employer as opposed to contractor. So, well, I like client. Doesn't matter. You can use anything you want. Okay. Now, the contract administrator is the other name that I've used. Now, folks, watch this. In many contracts around the world, the word used is engineer. In New Zealand, we call it engineer to the contract. The engineer has got two roles. FIDIC uses the word engineer, and so on. The problem is this. If you use the word engineer, and I'm not an engineer, and I'm administering the contract, in some jurisdictions, you can't call yourself an engineer. In Malaysia, unless you're registered with a board of engineers, you can't call yourself an engineer. Nor can you call yourself a quantity surveyor or an architect, because there's legislation. And yet you're saying, oh, the contract says engineer. And then engineer is so-and-so. But that person might be an architect who's administering the contract. So I prefer a more generic term or phrase. And what's a generic phrase? What is the function of these people? You know, the superintendent, if you want, under the Australian regime, or superintending officer under the Public Works Department contract in Malaysia, or the engineer in some contracts, and so on. Why don't we just call the person who is doing the function of contract administration contract administrator? Now, folks, hear me out now. Listen to me very carefully. I had nothing to do with a JCT contract, but would you believe it? After decades, 70, 80 years of the JCT's existence, when they had used the word architect to mean contract administrator, they have finally now amended their contract and they call it what? Contract administrator stroke architect, contract administrator stroke architect, contract administrator stroke architect. Brilliant. The JCT is moving towards using a generic terminology called contract administrator. Brilliant. I did not copy them. They didn't copy me, obviously. Okay, but anyway, they're nearly there. I can imagine the reason why they didn't drop the word architect is because the architect wouldn't allow it in the UK. They will at some point. Okay, question I have here is, who can be the contract administrator? Anyone? The answer is, anyone can be a contract administrator. However, they need to understand their roles very, very carefully. And if in some jurisdictions, they've got certain functions which only qualified personnel can do, like for instance, an architect under some jurisdictions like Malaysia, where only they can do certain functions, make sure that those functions are only done by a qualified architect or an engineer or whoever. Okay, so that's that. Then the next question is this. Can the contract administrator be the client? Can the contract administrator be named as the client? Because, you know, we don't need to engage this third party and so on and pay them fees and so on. Can the contract, you know, it might be a small project, might be a small renovation project. It's just the client and the contractor. The answer is, yes, you can. But just remember, you can do that. But when it comes to certain functions where you have to act impartially, like extension of time, for instance, your duty is in the contract. So when it comes to extension of time evaluation, make sure you evaluate that impartially. So you're wearing two hats. One is as a client and one is as an independent contract administrator. Do not fall foul of being, I'm not going to give you extension of time, when the contract says you have to act independently when it comes to contract administration. Extension of time, for instance. Okay. Now, next question is, can the contract be awarded on a pure lump sum basis? This particular contract, STCC RSP, the answer is yes, you can. Can it be awarded on a lump sum with quantities basis, with bills of quantities? The reason why I put or schedules of quantities is historically, New Zealand, for some reason, we call it schedules of quantities instead of bills of quantities. I don't know why, but that's what we do. Okay, only in New Zealand. So all textbooks call it bills of quantities, but even then we're changing, because now we've got the Australian New Zealand Standard Method Measurement, and we're now calling it bills of quantities. So it's a bit of a mindset change. You know, hey, look, you know, we don't have to call it schedule of quantities when the whole world is calling it bills of quantities. So hey, in New Zealand, we will be calling it bills of quantities over time. The question is, can this contract be used with quantities? Answer yes. Can it be awarded as a schedule of rates contract? You know, like some maintenance contract and all that. The answer is yes. Okay, I missed one question. Can the contract be used as a design and build contract? Wow, that's a big question. The answer is yes. We'll look at that in a minute. What happens if the contract's awarded without a lump sum price or a bills to quantities or schedule rates? How do you price the work? The answer is fair market rate if there is a contract. And if there is no contract for some reason, our contract hasn't been entered into because they're missing some ingredients or whatever, then on a quantum merit, which is what it's worth. Now, I want to highlight a few things just very quickly before we look at the actual contract itself. Now, the contract has got design obligations if the contractor has got a design obligation included within the scope. The reason why I'm highlighting this is this comes from a particular government contract. This is not from the STCC, it comes from government contract. And look at the words in red, which says, shall absolutely guarantee the government, independent of fault, that the design materials and all that are suitable for the node. This is called fitness purpose obligation, even for design. That is an impossible obligation for an insurance company to insure, but that is a standard in Malaysia under the government contract. So be it. Continental European countries have fitness purpose obligation even for design. So be it. Okay, policy decision. Normally contracts would say reasonable skill and care. Like this, for instance, this comes from the JCT design and build contract, and this also comes from the CIDB design supplement contract. But the problem is, it's 100 words in one sentence. Insofar as a contract is responsible for the design, shall have in respect insufficient the liability to the employer, whether under statute or otherwise, as would an architect. All that gibberish, 100 words in one sentence, doesn't help me explain to you what it is. I'll be spending the whole day doing it. I've only got an hour. So let's move on. If I were to reword that, the answer is the contractor owes a reasonable skill and care obligation. In other words, the standard is not absolute guarantee like in the other contract I showed earlier. The standard is what any other reasonably competent professional would have done under the circumstances. Example, if you take action against an architect for designing using asbestos, and this was in 1960, the architect could say, oh, but I did what any other reasonably competent architect would have done in 1960 under the circumstances. And I can get away with murder. Sorry, not murder. I can get away with saying that I don't fall below that standard expected of a professional. Okay, are we clear? Right. Now, that is a standard of reasonable skill and care. Which another way I've worded it as well, contractor owes the same obligation for design as with any other design professional. So there you go, 11 words, 13 words. You do not need 100 words in one paragraph. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier this creature called contract administrator, or the engineer or superintendent or contract administrator or supervising officer or superintendent officer or whatever it is that you call them, engineer, architect, and so on. Two roles, one is as an agent, one is as an independent professional. Most of these contracts by default would expect the contract administrator to have these two roles. One is as an agent, acting in the best interest of the client, and the other is as an independent professional, typically when it comes to certification. Example, extension of time. Example, has practical completion been achieved? Answer, well, I'll have to decide independently as an independent professional. That is the standard expected. Now, I mentioned the reference again. A lot of these style of writing, plain language, a Bible, a dictionary. The best one is Brian Garner's dictionary, a dictionary of modern legal usage. Now, in case you're wondering, who is Brian Garner? When I mentioned Judge Mark Painter, Professor Joseph Kimball, and Mark Adler, and Michelle Asprey, and Professor Peter Butt, and all that, these are all top 10 world authorities in modern legal drafting. If they are the top 10 world authorities, including Judge Painter, then Brian Garner is a guru of the gurus. That's why he writes dictionaries. The other people, the mere mortals, write books. Now, this is probably one of the best books I would recommend. If you want lots of case law references, if you're a lawyer particularly, you'll love this, okay? Lots of case law and so on. Modern Legal Drafting by Peter Butt. Okay, now, again, demonstrating the non-completion clause in the Public
It's
Works
7:45.
department in Malaysia, for instance, you can see the way it's worded. Okay, lots of words, whereas it can be rewritten in just Malaysian law applies to this contract, for instance, nice and easy. Of course, yesterday I said you should not overdo it, and I am now going to move to another document. So bear with me, where I said this yesterday. You must look at what it is that your client wants, because in future, clients will not pay you unless you are writing in plain language. I'm going to share with you the actual contract itself so that we can run through the clauses. We've seen this earlier, right? Where I showed you the use of the phrase called client and contractor. Okay, and then I've already shared with you the structure, the lovely project management structure. Now, the whole contract is structured quite simply, part A and part B. What is part A? You fill in the blanks. What is so difficult about filling this in? The parties to contract: client, name, correspondence. Contractor, address, telephone, email. Contract administrator, name, correspondence, address, email. Done. Just fill in these blanks. These are the appendices, if you want. I've just called it part A here, okay? Now, here is a very important provision. If you look at it under contract documents, it says that these are the documents that form the contract. Client's requirements. Why do you have that? Because you might be using it as a designable contract. And you have employer's requirements. Okay, as a document, for instance. Breakdown of work and prices, because you might not have the bills of quantities. You might have breakdown of works and prices, like in a lump sum contract. Or you might have a bills of schedule of quantities. Actually, this was drafted from Malaysia. I should have just used bills of quantities, but because of the influence with New Zealand and so on, and only New Zealand, I've used it, bills or schedule of quantities. I mean, so what? That's a little bit of a Kiwiness creeping into a contract used in Malaysia, but it's okay. There's no harm, nothing wrong with that. Okay, schedule rates. Hey, do you remember I said you can use it as a schedule rates contract? So all you need is you've attached a schedule rates, it becomes a schedule rate contract. If you don't attach a BQ, bills of quantities, it's without quantities. That's it. Of course, you normally have drawings, specifications, and contractor's proposal. Wow, what's that? That's to highlight the fact that you could use it as a designable contract. And then the rest of the fill in the blanks. Oops, yeah, scope, price of the work. So all you have to do is just fill in the price. How much? Okay, it's in Malaysian ringgit. So if you want a UK version of it, you put in British pounds. I've done a sort of a New Zealand version, mainly for my students, although they've used it in some projects in New Zealand, including the, surprisingly, Papa Rich restaurant project in Auckland, which is actually a Malaysian owner, but the project in Auckland. And it was my Kiwi student who used it. And she used this modified New Zealand version of it. So there you go. A price for the works, the date for starting the work, and date for completion. Just look at the references. It just refers to the actual clause in section B. That's all. Okay. Now, and the rest of it, fill in the part A. How long is the defects liability period? Oh, look, if not stated, it is 12 weeks. Only 12 weeks? Shouldn't it be 6 months or 12 months or whatever? The answer is, remember, this was targeted at renovation and small projects. So the policy committee said, hey, look, let's have a default of 12 weeks. Fine, no worries. Oh, if you want it to be 6 months or 12 months or 1 year, just put 52 weeks there. Done. Okay, liquidated damage, and the cross-reference is there. Insurance, advance payment. Wow. Oh, look, it says here, if not stated, the amount is nil. So don't worry, leave it. Don't have to amend this contract. If you don't want advance payment, just leave it blank or just state nil. That's fine. So in other words, there's no advance payment. And time within which you must be paid. Ooh, wow, that's a short 7 days. Interesting, but it doesn't matter. You can fill in 28 days, 30 days, whatever it is that you want. And materials on site, and person who nominates a mediator. In this case, we'll put the Kuala Lumpur Regional Center for Arbitration, because this was published in 2015. This obviously needs to now read AIAC, Asian International Arbitration Center. Okay, and likewise the arbitrator and so on. And law governing this contract, it says Malaysian laws. So if you want to use it in New Zealand, you'll say New Zealand laws. If you want to use it in Papua New Guinea, you'll say Papua New Guinean laws. Otherwise, you'll have to come back to Malaysia and get a lawyer here to interpret that and so on. And then right at the end, you don't say on the date first hereunto set forth above. No. Signature, name, organization, date, and a witness. Okay, nice and simple. In Malaysia, there is this thing called an identity card. So typically people use that, or if you're a foreigner like Nick, he will probably have a passport number that he'll sign when he's building his mansion in, I don't know, in Putrajaya or wherever it is that he lives. He can tell us where he lives. Probably some fancy house, given that we were told he earns quite a lot. Okay, now let's look at the, remember, only 7 clauses. This is the first one, part B, the actual clause itself. The first one talks about general obligations, contract administrations, and so on. Now, I just want to highlight a few things. The client, contract administrator, contractor must comply with all the obligations expressed in this contract and those implied in law. Someone might ask, why are you talking about some implied terms in law when implied terms will already be implied in this contract anyway? Why do you have to say it? Just a reminder. Okay, of course, you won't be writing all the implied terms in law that the contractor, that the client won't prevent the contractor from fulfilling his work, and it will be implied that adjudication as a dispute resolution scheme will be implied in the Malaysian contract. Yeah, lots of things that will be implied, but you can't list them down, and you don't. You normally will be silent. But this is just a reminder. Excuse me, folks. Don't just look at the express provisions. There are a few things hovering around called implied terms. So just as a reminder, that's all. You can drop it off if you don't want. And then this thing about all parties must act in a spirit of mutual cooperation and do their best to avoid disputes is taken a little bit from the NEC 4, or rather in those days it was NEC 3 and so on. Spirit of mutual cooperation. Hey, look, come on, let's all be friends and hold hands and sit around a campfire and sing Kumbaya. That kind of a spirit of mutual cooperation. Then what is it the client's general obligations are? Well, the normal things: give access in a timely manner, provide whatever information, pay the contractor. And if your contract administrator has died or has migrated elsewhere, name a replacement. Okay? Basic things like that. And also, of course, don't forget, comply with all the laws of the land. I don't have to list down all the statutory obligations, because if we were to do it, it's going to be changing every week. Are we going to say that the MCO orders in Malaysia under an act of parliament, if you don't list it down, you're not going to be obliged to comply? Of course you will. So you have to comply with it anyway. Now, here's a tip. If you really want to list down some of the acts, list it in the preliminary section of your bills of quantities. Okay? Fine. So you can do it there if you want, but don't put it in a standard form of building contract. Now, what about the contractor's general obligation? What's the contractor supposed to do? The answer is, well, complete the works using competent personnel. That using competent personnel, I'll never forget this. One of my former colleagues from High Point Rendell, Abu, and we call him Abu-san because he used to work for the Japanese, he said, oh, Naseem, you must emphasize that they must use competent personnel. So this part of the competent personnel I dedicate to Abu-san, who insisted that it must be there. Policy committee, fine. I've got no problem as long as it's in plain language. And then complete all the work on time and cooperate with others and so on. And then, of course, the contract administrators, oops, what was it? The contract administrators' role to provide all available information in a timely manner, make all decisions, okay, and administer this contract in a timely manner, carry out, as a reminder, certification functions impartially, okay? Right, there you go. And the last part, 132, basically says the contract administrator becomes functious official, out of office. But I didn't use that fancy terminology. I just say authority ends automatically when the final payment certificate is issued. There you go, nice and easy. Okay, now, there you go. Okay, and then the last bit of this first clause is about instruction. All I want to highlight is the style. Look, all contract administrators' instruction decision certificates must be dated and made in writing. That's it. And just to remind them that it must be in writing, no oral instruction unless confirmed by the contract administrator. No monkey business for the whatever, or for the contractor to confirm. No, Mr. Contract Administrator, you want something, put it in writing. And if you don't, the contractor is not obliged to do it. Okay? And then there is a very comprehensively drafted variation clause, which is nice and easy. Contract administrator can issue instructions to vary the works. All instructions are taken to have had the client's approval. Remember, the contract administrator is acting as an agent of the client. So it's assumed that the contractor doesn't say, hey, do you have authority and so on. That's taken as a given. Now, when we look at the time obligations, which is the second clause, give contractor possession of the project site at one time or progressively. Well, this being a renovation contract, surely if you're going to use stages, you're likely to give possession of site progressively. Hence the requirement for you to not necessarily give possession of site all in one go, but to give it progressively. Contractor must start on the date stated, remember we said earlier, and must finish on the date stated in A7 earlier. There is a requirement for you to submit a program, and the program does not form part of the contract. Of course it shouldn't, like in most good contracts around the world. The program is a document that you must submit, but it doesn't form part of the contract, okay? And there's a requirement to update the program whenever there are significant changes, which is all nice and good. Oh, question, you know, you should say that the program must be done in Primavera or Microsoft Project or whatever. No. If you want specific requirements like that, put it in the preliminary section of the bills of quantities or in the document elsewhere, not in a standard form of contract, because not all contracts require you to use a prepared program in Primavera. And yes, you must progress with the works in a regular and timely manner. And you must use reasonable efforts to prevent delay. I didn't use the word best efforts like some contracts do, because then they'll create argument. Best means best including spending money, la la la. No. Reasonable. In fact, even the word best has been construed to mean reasonable in other jurisdictions. So why don't we just use the word reasonable? And you can issue a suspension order, and in Malaysia, for instance, or in many countries, you can issue a suspension under 241. There you go, it works. And the contractor can also suspend works if not paid. That's an express provision in the contract. And I want to highlight this, the word adjusting. Why is the word adjusting the date for completion instead of extending the date for completing the works? By the way, for those of you who are not familiar with the JCT contract, for the first time in the history of mankind now, anywhere around the world that follow the JCT style of drafting, the UK JCT now uses the word adjusting the completion date. Wow. And I've used the same. I did not copy JCT. I did it for this reason. Because you may extend the time, and if, say, you have extended time by 6 months, and then you may have a variation omission, knocking off maybe a month worth of work. You might want to then, having extended to June, make it back to May, within the overall time frame, of course, right? But not earlier than December, which is the original date. So if you want to make it to May, how do you give an extension of time from June to May? Do you call it a contraction of time? Or do you call it an extension of time of -1? Or do you call it an extension of time from June to May? Look, just use the word adjustment. Get used to it. Anyway, JCT does it. Phew. At least I got one other person who's backing me up. And of course, you have to give notice, which is quite normal in any good construction contracts. And in this case, there are only 5 grounds for extension of time. Now, you might think, is that enough? When contracts like the architect's contract in Malaysia have got 20, 30 grounds for extension of time. Okay? The answer is, a lot of it is captured under act or failure to act by the client and contract administrator. So it's a very all-encompassing, any act of prevention, exceptionally bad natural environmental event. Is there a force majeure clause in there? COVID-19, everyone? Yes? Answer is, there isn't a force majeure. Force majeure is a creature of contract. If it's not in the contract, you don't get an extension of time due to force majeure and no loss on expense and so on. But here, we've got government authority or statutory body, so you can get extension of time under 3. The question of whether you can get loss and expense or financial compensation is a question to be answered tomorrow. Remember when we talk about the financial issues. And then when it comes to practical completion and so on, there you go. It says contract administrator decides when you have achieved practical completion, and you certify in a document called practical completion certificate. That's what it's called. Nice and easy. You don't have to call it certificate of practical completion, which is passive or whatever. It's active, and you don't even need capitalization. And the definition of practical completion follows common law definitions, where work is substantially complete, minor defects accepted. And the defects liability period is there. You refer to section A9. And if you don't complete, what happens? You issue what is called a non-completion certificate. Again, no capital letters, not certificate of non-completion and so on. It's just a non-completion certificate. There you go, nice and easy. And you pay compensation at liquidated damage at the rate stated in A10. Okay, and right, that brings an end to the clauses within the contract. I just want to very quickly show you a sample of a couple of templates that is in here. And that is, that's a payment one, an extension of time, or rather adjustment of time template. Right, where is it? Come on. Ah, there you go. Adjustment of time certificate. This is a template. Look at how simple it is. Your date for completing the work is whatever it is. Under clause B252, I now adjust the date to be the new date. And the reasons are there. All you have to do is certify, sign, and the contractor acknowledges. Nice and easy. All in plain language. You don't have to check anything. Let's have a look at one more, which oh, there you go, practical completion. I certify that practical completion of the clause was achieved on, just fill in the date, sign your life away. Hey presto, we're done. And final completion certificate, likewise, nice and easy. And a non-completion. The current date for completing the work is, I certify in a clause, whatever, you failed to complete. You're now liable to pay liquidated damage at that rate, and you sign. End of story. I will now go to the very last slide of my PowerPoint and finish off within about a couple of minutes or so. I hope that you've got a good understanding of how the time clause within this contract, as well as the general formation and the contract administration functions work. And I now ask you, I will be putting up a poll shortly, and the poll will come up shortly, and Daniel will activate it. But I just want to remind us all, what is Vision 2030? By 2030, every construction contract, smart contract or otherwise, has a structure and plain language style that parties to contract administrator, and secondary users like dispute resolvers, arbitrators, adjudicators, and so on, can clearly understand, clearly and easily. And I'm writing a white paper. When it is done, it will have a drafting guideline as well, but not on policy matters, only on drafting style. And I hope that you will support it if you want at some point. Now, Daniel will be starting up and he will take over from here. I suppose I should stop share, and he'll also activate a poll. Let me see. Oh yes, yep, you're on Daniel's screen now. He will be activating a poll. Can you please, before you disappear, just answer these questions? Assuming construction contracts can be rewritten in plain language without losing legal intent, keep the lawyers happy, right? By when should they be rewritten in plain language? 2020, 2022, 2025, or 2030? Those are your options. And once you have selected your option, you press submit. And I now hand over back to the tech moderator, who will be sharing the results once he's got a certain number of minimum responses. I suppose should be, I don't know, if you're still answering, you keep answering maybe for the next 1 or 2 minutes. Then he will share the results. I'm curious to know what you think, or how efficient we should be in rewriting all these contracts in plain language. He will share it shortly, and I will respond to all your questions from today's session, from the chat session, tomorrow. Thank you very much. It is now signing off at 8:03 in the evening in Auckland, New Zealand. Goodbye. The music will start, and you can continue doing your